Welcome back to Just Living. Today we're going on an adventure to rediscover America's forgotten past. We're in the San Rafael Valley in southern Arizona, close to the U.S.-Mexico border. It was here on April 12, 1539, that a Franciscan friar named Marcos de Niza became the first European to travel west of the Rockies in what would become the United States. Accompanying him was an African slave named Estevanico, nicknamed Esteban or simply El Negro. He became the first African to set foot on the North American continent back in 1527 as part of the ill-fated Narvaez expedition. The story he would tell the Spanish authorities upon his return to Mexico City captivated everyone and led to the follow-up expedition to the United States, led by Marcos de Niza. What had everyone so excited? More about that later, but as we drive the trail where they traveled almost 500 years ago, let's learn more about Estevanico and the Narvaez expedition. The Narvaez expedition, led by a man named Panfilo de Narvaez, intended to explore the eastern shores of Mexico and set up colonial settlements there. In 1527, he left the port city of Santo Domingo in present-day Dominican Republic with 6 ships and 600 men. On their way to Cuba, a hurricane developed, sinking 2 of his ships and killing 60 of his men. Regrouping in Cuba, the expedition sailed again in February 1528 with 400 men, 80 horses, and the intention of sailing to the eastern shores of Mexico, when another storm with strong winds forced them off course. They ended up making landfall 15 miles north of present-day Tampa Bay, Florida. Once there, Narvaez and his men decided that this landing place wasn't suitable for settlement. So he ordered 300 of his men, including El Negro, to travel north on foot, with the remaining 100 men and 10 women sailing north, with the hopes of reuniting at a suitable natural harbor, where they would build a settlement. Unfortunately, the 2 groups would never meet again. The ships continued north, but didn't find a suitable harbor, so they turned south, hoping to find Narvaez and his men. Unable to do so, and running low on supplies, the ships decided to return to Havana. After getting resupplied, they returned to the Tampa Bay area and searched for the land party for over a year without success. It would eventually return to Mexico. Things didn't go as well for Narvaez. He and his men did find a suitable harbor and tried to signal the ships to return, but they never did. After talking to local friendly Indian tribes and being told there were vast cities of gold further north, Narvaez and his men continued north. However, not all the local Indians were friendly, and they found themselves under constant attack. After a few weeks, Narvaez and his men realized the ships weren't returning, and their chances for survival was in doubt. One of the men suggested building a forge and melting some of their weapons and armor to make tools to build their own boats to sail back to Mexico. So they constructed a forge out of a log and used deer skins for the bellows. They cut down trees and made charcoal for the forge. They then made hammers, saws, axes, and nails out of their iron gear. They sewed shirts together for sales. Twice, within sight of the camp, 10 men gathering shellfish were killed by Indian raids. The men killed their horses for food and material while they were building the boats. One horse every 3 days. They used horsehair to braid ropes and the skins for water storage bags. As horses were highly valued by the Spanish, they named the bay Bahia de los Caballos in honor of the sacrifice of the animals. By September, they had finished building 5 boats and set sail on September 22nd, 1528. After being ravaged by disease, starvation, and attacks by the various peoples they intended to conquer, 242 men had survived. Closely following the Gulf Coast, the boats proceeded to the west, but frequent storms, thirst, and starvation reduced the expedition to about 80 survivors before a hurricane cast El Negro and the remaining men onto the western shore of Galveston, Texas. There they suffered hunger and disease, causing them to name the Island of Doom. Narvaez is believed to have been swept out to sea during the storm. For the next 4 years, El Negro and the steadily dwindling number of his comrades lived as slaves in the complex indigenous world of South Texas, where tribes of different cultures and languages often lived in conflict with one another. By 1532, only 4 members of the original expedition survived, including El Negro. In 1534, they were able to escape their captors and headed west and gradually south, hoping to reach the Spanish Empire's outpost in Mexico, becoming the first man of Europe and Africa to enter the southwestern United States and northwest Mexico. Their precise route has been difficult for historians to determine, but they apparently traveled across present-day Texas, perhaps into New Mexico and Arizona, and through Mexico's northern provinces near the Pacific coast before turning inland. In July 1536, near Culiacan in present-day Sinaloa, Mexico, the survivors encountered fellow Spaniards on a slave-taking expedition. As one of the men later wrote, his countrymen were dumbfounded at the sight of me, strangely dressed and in the company of Indians. They just stood staring at me for a long time. The Spaniards accompanied the survivors to Mexico City. Over the past 8 years, El Negro and his fellow survivors had traveled an incredible 3,000 miles on foot. In Mexico City, the 4 survivors of the expedition told stories of wealthy indigenous tribes to the north, which created a stir among the Spaniards. When the 3 other survivors declined to lead an expedition to the north, El Negro was instructed to act as a guide for this newest expedition. On March 7th, 1539, this new expedition to find the lost cities of gold, led by a Catholic priest named Fray Marcos de Niza, left from Culiacan, the northernmost Spanish settlement in Mexico. El Negro traveled ahead of the main party with a group of Sonoran Indians and a quantity of trade goods. As before, he assumed the role of a medicine man. He was instructed by Marcos to communicate by sending back crosses to the main party, with the size of the cross indicating the importance of his discoveries. One day, a cross arrived that was as tall as a man, and the messenger said that El Negro had heard reports of 7 large and wealthy cities in a land to the north called Cibola. The advance party proceeded to the north in search of Cibola, despite instructions from Fray Marcos to wait for him. On the way to catch up with El Negro, he encountered a pueblo where the people dressed in cotton robes and wore turquoise jewelry. They claimed to know about Cibola, a wealthy land with buildings 10 stories high. Marcos continued to follow El Negro, who occasionally sent back messengers bearing large crosses. Marcos also attracted a group of native followers who accompanied him on the journey to Cibola. These companions reinforced the idea that a great city was ahead of them. Sometime in late May, Marcos encountered 2 men from El Negro's party. Bloody from wounds and greatly agitated, they brought news that El Negro and his men had been attacked by the inhabitants of Cibola, and many were killed, including El Negro. Around June 5th, 1539, Marcos came within sight of the city. Instead of risking his life and forfeiting the opportunity to report the information, Marcos decided not to go into Cibola, but only observe it from a distance. Marcos described it as very pretty and more extensive than Mexico City. The Indians who accompanied him assured him that this was the smallest of the 7 cities. Marcos then raised a large pile of stones, placed a cross upon it, and took possession of the discovered lands in the name of the Spanish crown. After staking claim to the country, Marcos made a hasty retreat. He found that the local Indians, who were once friendly, had turned hostile. He provides few details of his return trip, except to say that he was more full of fear than food. Marcos reached Mexico City in August 1539 and turned over a copy of his report to his Franciscan superiors on August 26th. A year later, a much larger Spanish expedition led by Francisco Vasquez de Coronado was sent to find this incredible city. But he never did. The lost cities of gold remain one of America's most enduring mysteries. Even today, modern historians have no idea what El Negro and Marcos de Niza had discovered. Although rumors still circulate saying that the peoples of Cibola hid their vast wealth in caves inside the Grand Canyon, which were eventually discovered by the US government and shipped to a secret vault like the one shown in the ending of the Steven Spielberg movie Raiders of the Lost Ark. Much like the vast treasure, this amazing story of the first African explorer to set foot on North America and the United States has been hidden away until today. I hope you enjoyed this story of adventure, bravery, and survival. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. And also please consider donating to us at buymeacoffee.com/justlivin'. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Just Livin'.